So we've continued our look at TED Talks as the text for the worship week and the worship service. And this week we joined together on Wednesday and we took a look at a talk by an astronaut named Chris Hadfield. And the name of his talk kind of lets you know it's a spoiler. He says, "What I Learned from Going Blind in Space." I don't know if any of you know this guy, Chris Hadfield. He made a name for himself in viral videos last year a little bit when he did a cover of David Bowie's Space Oddity from the International Space Station. He got instruments and a little recording studio and did a little cover of this song David Bowie wrote about an astronaut and ground control in communication with each other. And David Bowie got in touch with him and said, "It's the best cover of that song I've ever heard." He comes back and he gives a talk not about that, but rather an experience he had of something which should have been absolutely terrifying. So he talks about the fact that when he was 9 years old, he decided he was going to be an astronaut, that he knew this is what he wanted to be, and he shows a picture in the talk of him in a little cardboard spaceship that he had made when he was a kid, just to prove it. He talks about that journey in the van after years and years, 20 years of training before he goes up for the first time, getting strapped into this rocket, having more power than he's ever experienced, pushing at his back higher and higher. And he says the first time that people went into space, they knew that the failure rate, catastrophic failure rate he called it, was 1 in 9. And the time he went up, it was 1 in 35. He said, "I knew that there were two possibilities. Either I'm about to be floating weightless in the vast, beautiful expanse of the universe, or I'm about to be dead." He talks about the rocket pushing and pushing and pushing until that moment when you're released into the vastness of space. He says that for 6 months he stood and looked out of a window and saw a sunrise and a sunset about every 45 minutes. That you can see the earth silently, but it looks like it should be roaring, turning around. He says, then you get prepared to go out on your first spacewalk. He talked about the fact that you get into this one-person rocket ship, or this one-person spaceship. You go out, and suddenly you're connected to the other 7 billion humans by one tiny little rope. He says you look down, and underneath and above you and to the right and left, all there is this vast, enormous blackness. On and on and on. He got out, and he's getting prepared to do his work, and then he said his left eye went blind. All of a sudden, something started tearing up, and the tears formed something thicker and thicker and globbed over his eye. And he thought, what's happening? And then he says, because there's no gravity in space, and you can't wipe your eyes and when you're in the little dome, there's no gravity, and so the tears, through surface tension, kind of work their way up the bridge of your nose, and then that glob went into his other eye. He's on his first spacewalk, he's been out there a few minutes, and he says he's completely blind. Now, as only an astronaut could say, he responds by going, well, I can't see, but I can talk, and I can move, I can hear. And he says, more importantly than that, we've practiced what should have been terrifying thousands of times. He says, we have acquainted ourselves intimately, deep familiarity with all of the terrifying things that could happen. We've practiced incapacitated crew member rescue. We've been underwater when the oxygen goes out. We have turned the lights off. We know the switches and buttons on this machine better than I know any human being. I heard him in an interview say, I am more familiar with this machine than myself or any other person I've ever met. This is the thing I know. And he said that for that reason, what to you and I, if we woke up and discovered we were floating in the vastness of the universe blind, would be terrifying, for him, had a joy in it. Because he knew very well all of the fear all of what could go wrong, and he had practiced it. He said the same thing about traveling back to Earth. He said you get in this little capsule and you're going as fast as you've ever gone, rocketing toward the Earth, and you realize that the pieces of the capsule outside of where you're at are burning away in the atmosphere, and you're not. And then this meteorite, he says, basically, I'm riding a meteorite, and that's scary. We said it's okay because we knew that if this chute didn't open, we had another chute, and we know exactly how that works, and I've timed the mechanism. And he said, if you woke up and you're riding a meteorite, you would rightly be screaming in terror all the way down. He said, but us, we were laughing, like riding a roller coaster. We knew we could steer this meteorite if we had to. He said that there was an experience of awe and beauty and wonder that not only did he get to have, but he got to share with other humans about our possible humanity, what we can do. He said that it was only possible to have this experience and share it if I had practiced becoming familiar with all the things that could go wrong. And then he turns to everybody and goes, so what's the scariest thing you've ever done? Thanks a lot, right? In watching his talk, I thought about one of my experiences of awe and wonder in the midst of things that terrify me. It was high up, not that high up. It was 18 stories. It was during the time when I was training to be a minister, when you go through a period of being a hospital chaplain. And I was on the 18th floor at Mass General Hospital in Boston on my rounds, which was the oncology floor. And the reason I was on the oncology floor is that when you interview at the beginning of chaplaincy, at least when I did, my supervisor said, do you have any family history with illnesses that make you uncomfortable that you'd rather not deal with? And I said, yeah, actually, most people who've died of illness in my family have died from cancer, so I'd prefer not to be on that floor. And she said, great, you're on the oncology floor. So I'm doing my rounds on the oncology floor one day, and I walked in to a room where this older woman was sitting in a chair by herself looking out the window. And it was a big glass window, maybe from here to this side of the chancel, overlooking Boston, floor to ceiling. And I walked in, and she was sitting alone, immaculately dressed, totally upright in her posture, with a little vase of flowers on her table, a copy of The Economist, The New Yorker. She had the New York Times laid out. I walked in, and she turned to me and said, oh, hi, who are you? I said, well, ma'am, I'm the chaplain on the floor. And she said, oh, what kind of chaplain are you? What religion are you from? I said, oh, well, I'm a Unitarian Universalist. She said, oh, I was brought up Unitarian Universalist. How wonderful. Where are you training? Well, ma'am, I'm at Harvard Divinity School. Oh, I went to Bryn Mawr, back when women were not going to college all that often. I'm very proud of that. And I said, oh, that's wonderful. We sat and stood and looked out the window for a few moments in silence. She turned and said, oh, hello. Who were you? We had that conversation again, and a couple of times again. And while we're having this conversation, 18 stories up overlooking Boston, I can watch this storm forming in the distance over the city skyline. And it just got bigger and bigger and bigger, getting closer and closer to our window. And this was not the kind of storm that I experienced in Boston all that often. It was the kind of storm I was used to growing up in Texas. It was loud with lightning and thunder, and it was pounding the walls of this building, so much so that we could feel them shake. And all of a sudden, the storm was on us, and we were sitting in total silence, and she reached over and held out her hand, and I grabbed her hand, and I sat in the chair next to her, and for what must have been 10 minutes, we sat in silence, holding each other's hand, watching this tremendously powerful storm beat against the walls of this hospital room, so much so that the building was moving. And like it was scripted for a TV show or movie, the storm ended, the clouds parted, Rays of sunshine came in just like they were supposed to. Blue sky opened up like the one we've had this weekend. And she turned and said, "Oh, hello. Who are you?" I can tell you this was one of the most profound, holy moments I've ever experienced. This is a religious experience for me. I was without worry. This was one of the most peaceful moments I've ever had. I was not afraid. I wasn't bored. I wasn't angry. I wasn't lonely. I wasn't feeling want. It was one of the most profound moments of peace and joy I've ever had, holding this woman's hand who couldn't remember who I was, right up against a window with a tremendous storm, and that shouldn't have happened. Because two of my greatest fears are losing my mental abilities and strong weather. When I was a kid in Grand Prairie, we had a storm so bad that the land that we lived on began to flood, so much so that I watched horses float by in the water and pieces of people's homes, and we were putting sandbags in our house and putting all the furniture up and sweeping water out. And ever since then, I don't like big storms. It's getting a little better. And I'm a person who identifies my worth and value so often with where I went to school, how smart I am, how I can solve problems. I'm deadly afraid that one day that thing which has given me so much praise will disappear. I cannot control that, and I cannot control the storm. And yet, inches away and literally touching me, these fears provided one of the most peaceful moments I've ever had in my life. I find it interesting that fear can be both the thing that keeps us alive and something that, if we let it run our lives, can keep us from experiencing the holy in our midst. Now, I have many hundreds of thousands of years of genetic fear passed down. We all do. Our great-grandmother's 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 great-grandmother, to the nth degree, some little mammal poking their head out of the ice during the Ice Age, if they weren't scared of the saber-toothed tiger, didn't live to have babies. Something good about knowing what has more power than us. And yet, there's a kind of fear in my life that turns me inward and self-focused, that becomes a center of scarcity in my mind. There is not enough food, and so I need to have more. There is not enough money and resources in the world, so I better accumulate more. There's not enough security or success or X, Y, Z to go around. And therefore, because I am limited and scared and will one day die, I will do whatever I can to keep any injury or scarcity away. When fear is the primary motivator in my life, I'm unable to be generous. One of the ways that I understand God is generosity. In the 3rd chapter of Genesis, this is only 3 chapters into one book of many dozens in the Bible. People's fear is already keeping them from meeting God. Adam and Eve, Adam, coming from the word Adama, dirt, earth, the dirt creature and his partner, have eaten from the fruit of the tree, and the God that walks through the cool of the day is the way that author describes it. The God that walks through the cool of the day is looking around in the garden and says, "Where are you? I can't see you." And he hears this voice coming out from the bushes. "We're over here. Why don't you come out and meet me?" And they say to him, "We found out that we're naked and we're afraid." We're only 3 chapters in, and human beings are already scared of being seen for who they are. Something in me doesn't want to be limited. Something in me doesn't want to admit the possibility of injury, loss, scarcity, illness, death. Something in me doesn't want to admit the reality of things which are inevitable. And that puts me at odds with a generosity that I believe is at the heart of creation itself. If you think about us living inside these little Russian nesting dolls, imagine the biggest one of those that you can, the biggest reality there is. I call that God. That, to me, is infused with generosity all the way down to the smallest nesting doll. Each piece of it gives of itself so that something else can be. A dying star becomes a planet. The planet and the earth becomes creatures who give of their own bodies to have more creatures, often until it gets to me and I go, okay, we're going to stop this whole giving thing. There is at the heart of creation itself this movement of a gift. And when fear turns me self-focused, when fear turns me into a machine that exists solely to perpetuate the safety and security of this set of atoms, I am no longer participating in a holy generosity that is more ancient than any of us. I set myself apart from all that is. In the poem this morning, the poet writes that there's something liberating about seeing Paris first. She imagines this world in which we could actually contain everything that we were afraid of in a city. Now, why you would choose Paris and not someplace you didn't want to go, I don't know. But in this model, a human being is actually able to contain everything you're scared of within the Paris city limits. And she says, okay, what then? Would it be enough to go up to the city line? Would you have to back away so much that you could watch the lights come up over the city? No, you'd probably have to avoid France entirely. And actually, you'd probably need to never turn toward France. She posits this idea that somewhere in us always, something is keeping us from being called to be who we are. And that a friend, she calls it a friend, would know this secret and invite us to see Paris first. I'm not sure I would suggest us living without fear. It's good to want to jump out of a way of a car, or take care of our children, or keep our bodies healthy. But I think we should hold in suspicion any pattern of being which keeps us from participating in a generosity that is older than any of us. I think that admitting our limitations and saying out loud to another human being why I am afraid and what I am afraid of, admitting the fact that I am limited, cannot control the storm or my mind or life, does something to the fear which is so often a motivator in me. Doesn't make it go away, but it stops it from making me so self-focused. So I would invite us as a practice to pay attention to the moments when you can literally feel your body constricting. When you can turn fear into this awareness of I am hoarding attention and resources and love because I'm afraid I might just be a limited person. I do not know why we exist. But I do know that one of the most profoundly satisfying, joyful, peaceful experiences of being a human is the time when we get to be a gift to another. And I don't get to be a gift to another when I'm focused on keeping resources and time and love and affection only for myself. Each and every one of us has an opportunity in the midst of the storm, in the midst of what terrifies us, in the midst of our illness and scarcity and anxiety, to pause and note it and memorize it and say it out loud and let someone know that it exists so that it might release its hold on us enough that we can turn around and decide once again to be of service to another. We cannot erase fear from our lives, but we can let it teach us and let it turn us toward being a gift to others. May it be so all days. Amen.